Good evening, America. Tonight, I am going to tell you something that the mainstream media is burying underneath all the diplomatic optimism, underneath the deal announcements, and underneath all the talk of memorandums and peace frameworks. While America has been watching the headlines, while the world has been holding its breath waiting for a peace deal to be signed, something has been happening inside Iran that changes everything. American intelligence agencies have confirmed it. The evidence is real. And tonight, every person watching this video needs to understand what is actually happening behind the scenes of this war, because the story you are being told and the story that is actually unfolding are two very different things. Iran is rebuilding its military right now, today, during the ceasefire. While its diplomats are in Qatar talking peace and its foreign minister is telling the world a deal is within reach, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has been quietly, rapidly, and deliberately restoring its missile sites, its launch systems, its drone production facilities, and its weapons manufacturing capacity. American intelligence officials have confirmed this to CNN. The effort is described as far faster than expected. Officials warn it means Iran could still pose a major threat to regional allies if President Trump decides to resume military operations. And Iran's own parliament speaker, Mohammad Bakr Kalibaf, told reporters this week that Iran's armed forces have already rebuilt capabilities damaged since the start of the conflict in late February. Let that sink in. The war started on February 28th. It is now May 28th, 90 days. In 90 days, while the world was watching the diplomatic theater playing out in Doha and Islamabad and Washington, Iran rebuilt. Not completely. Not to pre-war levels on every front. Former CIA director and retired General David Petraeus was blunt about the physical damage that was done. He told CNBC this week that Iran's entire navy is largely sunk except for fast boats. He said Iran's missile capacity has been substantially reduced. He said Iran has no air force left to speak of. Its headquarters and military facilities took devastating hits. By every conventional military measure, Iran was severely weakened by the American and Israeli strikes. But here is the crucial part that Petraeus added, and I want every American to hear this clearly. Despite all of that destruction, Iran can still threaten to shut the Strait of Hormuz. It can mine the waterway. It can use drones, missiles, and fast boats to hit commercial shipping. It retains the physical, geographic, and asymmetric military ability to prevent the strait from ever being restored to its pre-war state. And now American intelligence is saying Iran resumed parts of its drone production during the very ceasefire that was supposed to create space for diplomacy. The ceasefire was not just a pause in fighting for Iran. It was a window of opportunity to rearm. And here is the most alarming strategic conclusion that flows from all of this. Petraeus said it himself, and he is one of the most credible military voices in the United States. He warned that if Iran is allowed to have even some control over the Strait of Hormuz as part of the peace deal, Iran may emerge from this war strategically strengthened, even though it was militarily weakened. Think carefully about what that means. America launched the most intensive military campaign in the Middle East in decades. America and Israel together conducted hundreds of airstrikes. America imposed a full naval blockade. And the end result of all of that military power may be an Iran that controls the world's most important oil shipping lane as an accepted, institutionalized fact. Weakened on the battlefield, but stronger at the negotiating table. Devastated militarily, but empowered strategically. That is the trap this war has built, and it is the trap that every version of the current deal risks walking directly into. Now let us look at exactly where the deal negotiations stand today, May 28th, 2026, because the picture has shifted again in the last 24 hours, and the shifts are revealing. According to the Washington Times, Iran said Wednesday that the pending framework deal with the United States would reopen the Strait of Hormuz. But listen carefully to what Iran's description of that reopening actually entails. Under Iran's version of the framework, commercial shipping in the strait would return to normal within a month. The United States would lift its naval blockade of Iranian ports. And Iran's military forces would withdraw from positions they have taken in international waters. All of that sounds promising on the surface. But here is the part Iran included that tells you everything. The deal, according to Iran's state broadcaster IRIB, also requires the United States to withdraw its military forces from Iran's territory. The U.S. has conducted strikes inside Iran. America has had military assets operating in the region throughout this conflict. Iran is demanding those forces be removed as part of the deal. And Iran has made absolutely no mention of surrendering the administrative authority over the strait that it has been claiming since declaring a Persian Gulf Strait authority. Iran says ships can move. Iran also says Iran remains in charge of who moves and when. Meanwhile, the Axios reporting that broke earlier this week and has now been updated with new details reveals the full internal American picture of where this deal actually stands. The draft memorandum of understanding, according to a U.S. official with direct knowledge, includes Iran committing to never pursue nuclear weapons. It includes Iran agreeing to negotiate over a suspension of its uranium enrichment program. And it includes Iran agreeing to negotiate over the removal of its stockpile of highly enriched uranium. Negotiate over. Not surrender. Not immediately dismantle. Negotiate over in a 60-day window of follow-on talks that have not yet begun and may never produce a final agreement. The U.S. official also said something that should set off alarm bells for every American paying attention. He said Iran gave the U.S., through the mediators, verbal commitments about the scope of the concessions it is willing to make on suspending enrichment and giving up the nuclear material. Verbal commitments. Through mediators. In a situation where Iran's own foreign ministry spokesperson is simultaneously telling the press that Iran has made no commitment on nuclear issues whatsoever. Verbal commitments passed through intermediaries from a government whose public spokespeople are flatly denying those commitments exist. That is the foundation on which this peace deal is being constructed. And that brings us directly to the enriched uranium question, because it is the most dangerous unresolved issue in this entire crisis, and it deserves its own clear explanation tonight. According to the International Atomic Energy Agency, Iran's stockpile consists of approximately 440 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60% purity. That is nearly 900 pounds of material. 60% enrichment is not reactor fuel. Power plants run on uranium enriched to between 3 and 5%. 60% enrichment sits extremely close to the 90% threshold required for a nuclear weapon. The IAEA has been trying to get inspectors back into Iran since the war began and has been completely blocked. Nobody with independent authority can currently verify what is inside Iran's nuclear facilities, where that enriched uranium is stored, or in what condition it is. Trump has said publicly and repeatedly that Iran will have to relinquish this material one way or another. He has used those exact words, one way or another. The military option that was reportedly being prepared just last week involved strikes on the Isfahan nuclear facility, which is believed to be one of the primary storage locations for this enriched stockpile. The fact that those strikes did not happen was because diplomacy offered a more promising path. But diplomacy, as it currently stands, is only delivering verbal commitments through mediators that Iran's own officials deny making. And all the while, Iran is rebuilding the very military infrastructure that would make future strikes far more costly to execute. Here is another development from this week that cuts right through the optimistic framing being presented to the American public. Reuters quoted a senior Iranian source as saying on Sunday that Tehran has not agreed to hand over its highly enriched uranium stockpile, and that the nuclear issue was not part of the preliminary agreement with the United States. Not agreed. Not part of the agreement. That is a senior Iranian source speaking to one of the most credible news agencies on the planet, directly contradicting what U.S. officials are telling American reporters about the state of nuclear commitments in this deal. Both of those things cannot be true simultaneously. Somebody is not telling the truth. And the American public has a right to know which version of reality their government is operating on. Now let us talk about the Iran rebuilding story in more detail, because the specifics of what American intelligence is reporting deserve a much closer look than they have received. CNN's reporting, based on multiple U.S. intelligence officials, says Iran resumed parts of its drone production during the 6-week ceasefire with Washington that started in early April. The effort includes restoring missile sites, launch systems, and manufacturing capacity for critical weapons. Intelligence officials warned that the rapid recovery means Iran could still pose a major threat to regional allies if Trump decides to resume military operations. And Iran's parliament speaker confirmed it publicly, saying Iran's armed forces have rebuilt capabilities damaged since February 28th. The drone production detail is particularly significant. Drones have been one of Iran's most effective asymmetric weapons throughout this conflict. They are cheaper to produce than ballistic missiles, harder to intercept at scale, and can be manufactured in dispersed facilities that are far more difficult to target precisely than centralized missile plants. When intelligence officials say Iran resumed drone production during the ceasefire, they are describing an adversary that is specifically rebuilding the capabilities that are hardest to eliminate and most useful for continued low-level harassment of shipping, military bases, and regional infrastructure. This is not Iran preparing to surrender. This is Iran preparing for the next phase of whatever comes after this deal, whether that phase is a lasting peace or another round of conflict. And here's what Petraeus said this week about the Gulf states, which is something that has not gotten nearly enough attention in American coverage of this war. Former CIA Director Petraeus told CNBC that Gulf states are investing heavily in energy resilience and military defenses in response to this crisis. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait are all watching what is happening and drawing the same conclusion. The Strait of Hormuz is not safe. It may never be safe as long as Iran retains the physical capability to threaten it. So these nations are spending billions of dollars building alternative energy export infrastructure that bypasses the strait entirely. They are building overland pipelines. They are expanding port facilities on the Red Sea and the Arabian Sea coasts. They are buying advanced missile defense systems. They are hedging against a future in which Iran still controls the strait because that is the future they are concluding is most likely. The global economic consequences of this calculation are enormous. If Gulf states successfully build alternative export routes that bypass the Strait of Hormuz over the next decade, the strait's strategic importance diminishes. That is, in a way, the most effective long-term solution to Iran's control of the waterway. But it will take years and hundreds of billions of dollars, and in the meantime, the economic pain continues. U.S. inflation has been pushed to its highest level in years by this conflict. The Federal Reserve is reportedly weighing whether it may need to increase interest rates to respond to the energy price spike. The oil market is described as being at tank bottoms in Asia. American families are still paying elevated prices at the gas pump, at the grocery store, and on their airline tickets. And the Congressional Budget Office has not yet published a full estimate of the fiscal cost of the military operations alone, which have consumed enormous amounts of munitions, fuel, and logistical resources. Meanwhile, back in Lebanon, the war that reignited when this conflict began continues to grind on. The Israel Defense Forces have been conducting intensive nighttime airstrikes against Hezbollah targets across Lebanon, including more than 100 strikes in a single night earlier this week. The Lebanon ceasefire that was announced in April exists on paper and is violated almost daily. And Iran's Supreme Leader Mojtaba Khamenei issued a statement this week praising Hezbollah for achieving remarkable victories against what he called the fully armed terrorist American Zionist militaries. That is the supreme leader of the country America is trying to sign a peace deal with, publicly praising the proxy force that is shooting at American allies while his diplomats are negotiating in Qatar. The contradiction at the heart of all of this is now too large to ignore and too important to explain away. Iran is rebuilding its military during the ceasefire. Iran's parliament speaker is confirming that rebuilding publicly. Iran's supreme leader is threatening American military bases across the region. Iran's diplomats are telling mediators one thing, while Iran's spokespeople are telling the press the opposite. Iran's state broadcaster is publishing a version of the deal framework that describes Iran as permanently managing the Strait of Hormuz. And through all of this, the United States is being asked to sign a memorandum that delivers sanctions relief and asset unfreezing in exchange for verbal commitments that Iran's own government denies making. Let us be very clear about what the best-case scenario looks like from where we stand tonight. The best case is that a memorandum is signed in the coming days. The Strait of Hormuz is gradually reopened over a period of weeks. A 60-day nuclear negotiation begins with Iran. At the end of 60 days, Iran agrees to a suspension of enrichment and agrees to a mechanism for removing or diluting its highly enriched uranium stockpile under international supervision. The IAEA gets inspectors back into Iran. A longer-term peace framework is negotiated. The world moves on. That is the best case. And even the best case leaves Iran's missile program in place, Iran's proxy networks in place, and Iran's geographic control of the Strait of Hormuz as an enduring strategic reality. The worst case is that a memorandum is signed. Iran pockets the initial sanctions relief and asset unfreezing. The The nuclear negotiations in the 60-day window go nowhere. Iran's rebuilt drone and missile capability makes any future military action far more costly. Iran retains its enriched uranium. The IAEA is never given full access. And 3 years from now, America and Israel are back in the same conversation about whether to strike Iran's nuclear facilities. But this time, Iran's defenses are more dispersed, its production is more decentralized, and the political will in the United States to launch another war has been exhausted by the one we are still trying to end. That is the range of outcomes on the table right now. And America deserves a full, clear-eyed understanding of both ends of that range. Here's what I know for certain tonight. A deal is closer than it has ever been. The parties are arguing over words and sentences. The Strait has seen limited ship traffic under Iranian supervision. The White House wants a signing. Iran's Supreme National Security Council is reviewing the latest text. Pakistan and Qatar are pushing hard for an agreement. And American intelligence is watching Iran rebuild its military capacity with every day that passes without a final deal. The next 48 to 72 hours will likely be decisive. Either a memorandum gets signed and this war enters a new and highly uncertain diplomatic phase, or the talks collapse again and the United States faces the choice between accepting an indefinite stalemate and resuming military strikes against a country that has been quietly rearming throughout the ceasefire. America, here is my question for you tonight, and it is the most important one I have asked since this channel launched. American intelligence has now confirmed that Iran rebuilt parts of its military during the very ceasefire that was supposed to create space for peace. Iran's parliament speaker confirmed it publicly. Iran is rebuilding drones and missile systems right now today, while its diplomats are negotiating a peace deal in Qatar. Knowing that, do you believe the United States should sign this deal as quickly as possible to end the war before Iran gets any stronger? Or do you believe America should walk away from this deal and force Iran to give up its nuclear program and its weapons, rebuilding before a single sanction is lifted? This is the question that will define the rest of this war. Drop your answer in the comments right now. I want to read every single response. And if you are not subscribed yet, do it right now and turn on your notifications, because this story is going to break again before you wake up tomorrow morning.